Well, luckily for all of you, I played in another tournament. Maybe not lucky for me, but someday my opponents will get lots of rating points. This was the club championship. Somehow I tied for first due to terrible failures of the other top players in the last round. I hope they're hanging their heads in shame still. I was expecting to tie for third, but somehow the higher rated players decided that winning was unfair. So I was in a three-way tie for first, even though I didn't play the last 2 rounds because I was busy making lectures for all of you at home. Okay, so this was my second round game, which was actually the third round because I had an accelerated schedule. Actually, this was the second round. Let's see, what did I do? I took a bye in the end. Yeah, I take byes at ends of tournaments at the beginning. I can't remember. So this actually was round 2. This was against a chess club member and gadabout town, Matt Barrett, okay? And hopefully, in the airing of this video on YouTube, he's still alive. Okay, and we played a Sicilian, which, as all of my students know, is not only my favorite opening, but my favorite pizza. Speaking of pizza, oh, okay. I heard Claudia got a pizza from down the street today, and it was good, although Mike Hummer thought the price was a bit pricey. Okay, would I have a text about this lecture? Wow, it is about this lecture. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, so when I played the Sicilian, I would say about half the time I faced the open Sicilian, and the other half either c3 or bishop b5. And this game my opponent played bishop b5. Now I always play knight c6 because that's what I do. Although you can also play d6, e6, or g6. And even though I always play knight c6, I've also played a6. So I guess I'm a liar too. Okay, so knight c6. Now here my opponent played bishop b5. Obviously, he wouldn't play that move if I had played a6. And if he had pre-moved. Okay, so bishop b5. And this position, there's 2 common moves for black, and they have different middle game strategies. Who can raise their hand and suggest what the 2 most common moves are for the black pieces here? We'll call on a random student. Danny.
Knight d4.
Knight e4 is illegal.
Knight d4.
Knight d4, which is, I don't know, the 5th most common move. 6th, I don't know. 4th? Let's call on a real chess player. Richard Pointer.
e6.
Right, is one of the 2 most common. And can he do it after 2 beers? Is it possible?
I'm going to say a6.
The answer is no. Yeah, 2 beers is too many. Okay, so e6 is a very common move. And the other common move, possibly more common, is g6. Okay, and probably at the very top level, g6 is slightly more common. But I play e6. Now, the reason I play certain openings and certain variations doesn't have a lot to do with, studious thought. It has to do with random things that have happened in my chess career. One of those random things was I was playing in the New York Open, even before New York was called New York. That's how long ago the tournament was. And I had the white pieces in this position. My opponent played e6, and they totally crushed me. And I was like, wow, that's a good move. So I started playing e6. Okay, and I like e6. My play with white was not the best. Okay, so my opponent castled, which is probably what most people do. And the point of e6 is to play knight e7. And if white so chooses to capture on c6, we can recapture with a knight. Now, you may be asking or wondering, why didn't black take right away, even though it's white? Why didn't white take right away and ruin your pawn structure? Okay, and actually, that's a very common move also. You take towards the center, and the strategy for black is very unusual here. You would expect black's going to play d5 at some point. But actually, the strategy for black is to play knight e7, knight g6, and to play e5. And after playing e5, I often play d6, bishop e7, castles, and f5. And that's actually the game that I lost in the New York Open, something like 1985. I don't know. Okay, And I've actually had this many times also. Okay, most of my opponents don't take on c6, but that's interesting because you're rooting your opponent's pawn structure. Okay, so castle's knight e7. Now, as I've said in many previous lectures, but you probably weren't there because they were probably lectures for children, if it was Bughouse, white should play knight to d6 checkmate. So I don't play this variation in Bughouse. They're too risky. Okay, and my opponent here made a move I've never faced before, and I faced every move. It's a very strange contradiction. I've had people play c3, I've had people play rook e1, I've had people play knight c3, I've had people play b3, and I think I've had people play d3, but my opponent played d4. And this is sort of a contradiction of what white wants to do in the opening. Now, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the game Carlsen versus MVL, which was played, I believe, yesterday. What day is today? Tuesday? 2 days ago in the London Chess Classic playoffs. And in those playoffs, we also saw bishop b5 in the Sicilian. And one idea for white is to put his pawns on white squares, and his white square bishop isn't trapped back here, but it gets traded off. And you get sort of a Marazzi bind position, which is what Magnus did. So when you play bishop b5 in the Sicilian, you don't always play d4, although Magnus eventually did. You're either not playing the open Sicilian or you are, and here my opponent did both. And this is a very unusual move, because if he wants to play the open Sicilian, it's very strange to put the bishop here when these other pieces have squares they can go to, and the bishop, I think, has better squares than b5 where it's going to get traded off. So I didn't know the move d4 pretty early in the game, and afterwards when I looked at my database, it turns out this is the 5th or 6th most common move. So okay, now this is something I see a lot from lower rated players. The game goes e4, e5, or in this case, e4, c5. And when their opponent plays d4, as my opponent did here, they don't capture it. Well, the reason you're playing e5 or c5 on move 1 is to prevent d4. If we go back in this position, if white could move again, white should play d4, because that's a good move. And in other openings where black allows d4, white plays d4. For example, in the Caro-Kann, white plays d4. And in the French, white plays d4. If black played this, white would probably play d4 at the Grandmaster level. So when you don't want your opponent to play d4, and you play a move like c5, now you're going to take on d4. When your opponent does play d4, then you should capture it. Otherwise, they have a pawn on d4. So when my opponent plays d4, even though I don't know the move, excuse me, in this exact position, I'm still going to take on d4. Otherwise, d5 is annoying. So we traded. And now I had a long think. And after my think, I kept re-guessing? I kept second-guessing myself that I was playing the wrong moves and thought other moves were better. But actually, I was playing the most common in the computer moves. So sort of lucky. I could play a6, attacking the bishop. I could trade for the knight, make his queen move up. But I decided to play queen b6, which puts pressure on both of his pieces. And it turns out this is the most common move. And when my opponent took, I had many, many ways to capture. Now, I showed this in a kids class this Sunday, and I was showing them all the captures. You could take either way with the pawn, you could take with the queen, or you could take with the knight. And one of the kids raised his hand and explained that I had missed a capture. I did indeed miss queen takes f2 check. Okay, so kids see things that I don't. Okay, also I don't think I mentioned queen takes then, although maybe I did. Well, when I played queen b6, my intention was to take, but I changed my mind, and I decided to play d takes because I thought that was the least like something that he would have prepared. And it turns out, even though this is like the 3rd most common capture, it is recommended by Stockfish 6. So it's not as bad as I thought it was. And when I played the move, my opponent was not at the board, and I was thinking, man, that was a dumb way to recapture. So I actually decided that was a bad move after I played it, but thinking isn't my strong suit, so it turns out it was a fine move. Now, the reason I play d takes c6 is if I play the normal move, b takes is the most common, it's very hard to get my bishop out. And once I play d takes, my plan was to play e5, get a symmetrical type position, except my opponent's going to move his bishop a lot and has no development. So I wasn't really worried about the symmetrical position. The only thing I'm worried about when I play e5 is my opponent might play f4 and start attacking me because my king is on e8. But since f4 is illegal, I was less worried about it. Okay, and however, the reason I decided this was a bad move when I was playing, later to change my mind again, is because the queen can be harassed. The queen can be harassed by the white knight by moving either to a3 or d2 and finding a good home on c4. And once knight c4 is played, my queen is attacked, knight d6 check is a threat. And I hadn't seen that idea when I had recaptured. I had just randomly assumed my opponent would play knight c3, because in the open Sicilian, white usually plays knight c3. So my opponent retreated his bishop, and I played knight g6, so I could play e5 and get my bishop out somewhere. And I was expecting knight d2 to c4. Lucky for me, the computer says that's about equal. It says knight d2, e5, knight c4 attacking my queen, queen c7. And I was a little bit worried the knight would go to f5, but my knight can go to f4, so I probably shouldn't be worried. Anyway, computer says it's about equal. I was very pleased when my opponent played knight c3, a very natural looking move, but a move that I thought was a big mistake. But the computer engine says it's a tiny mistake. I think the computer engine doesn't understand the position as well as I do, but it calculates better than I do. And the reason I don't like knight c3 is the knight really doesn't have anywhere to go. It can't go to e4 due to illegality. It doesn't want to go to these squares, and knight a4 seems a little silly. So the knight's not really good on c3. In fact, when I play the move e5, which I think I did now, yeah. Now we have a symmetrical pawn structure, except when you see a pawn on c6 and a knight on c3, it's very advantageous to the pawn because the knight can't go to d5 or b5, whereas eventually I can go to the d4 square. And if my opponent wants to kick me out of d4, he'll have to play c3. Well, why is his knight on c3? Now, my opponent played what I thought was a good move, but he didn't know why he played it. Maybe he's better than I thought. And after the game, I said, why didn't you go here? And he said, I can go there. So he had a good reason for his move. He just didn't know what it was. Okay. Now here, my queen's on his b2 pawn. So if he moves his bishop anywhere, I'll take this pawn. And he played a very tricky move, a3. And the purpose of a3, which my opponent didn't know, was to move out his bishop. And when I played the move bishop e7, instead, he played b4, which is not a good move. That actually reminds me of the old Anand, which funnily enough would be the young Anand. And the young Anand, which is a better player than the old Anand, was a much worse positional player, but a better tactician, which is more important. So if you're taking notes, old Anand equals young Anand. Young Anand is worse, but better. Okay. And b4, obviously, I'm not going to play queen takes b2, but as I explained after the game to my opponent, why didn't you play bishop to e3? And he didn't realize that his move a3 was better than he expected. Because if I take the pawn on b2, he'll play knight a4, and my queen is embarrassed. It's so embarrassed, we're going to put it in red. Pretty embarrassed, right? Would have been better if I had put it in red originally, but okay. And he didn't see that he could play knight a4 after queen b2, so he was still expecting that bishop to e3 lost a pawn. Now in this position, if you play bishop to e3 and I take your pawn, not only am I attacking your knight, or maybe the knight's attacking the queen, what do I know? The queen also has two escape squares, b4 and a3, which the move a3 eliminates. So now he could play bishop e3, and I was going to play queen to c7. And okay, position's about equal. I would rather have black because his knight can't do anything. And eventually I'm going to play rook d8 attacking his queen. The queen doesn't really have a great square. And it's really difficult for him to play f4 because I have 3 pieces defending f4. So even though the pawn structure looks symmetrical and it looks equal, to me it's just nice for black because white doesn't really have a good plan. Okay, my opponent played b4, which is very weakening, and I castled. Now he made a really interesting move. He didn't play bishop e3, played bishop c4 first, and the idea is just to prevent my bishop from moving. Bishop d2 is risky because he can capture it. Bishop f5, bishop g4, and bishop h3 also just give the bishop away. After bishop e6, it's a double-edged decision about these doubled pawns here. It's very nice for my rook, and my pawns do control a lot of squares, but it's hard for black to break through when these 2 pawns are blocked by 1. So I decided to defend the e6 square by playing the move knight f4. Now the doubled pawns on the f file would be fine if he trades for my knight. He's giving away all the dark squares. He doesn't have a dark square bishop. All these dark squares are for the taking. And my pawn on e5 on the previous move was sort of blocking my bishop, but not after he takes on f4, because now my bishop has this beautiful f6 square. And I mean, white would really want to move his pawn back to b2, which I don't think is legal, although in some of the kids' classes. Okay, so this is a very good position for black. I have the 2 bishops, and my dark square bishop will soon be a monster.
Could white play after bishop takes f4, e takes, and we just play e5 and knight try to get to the d6 square?
You could play e5. Maybe you should play e5, although I would be somewhat scared that eventually I'm going to lose that pawn. Now you let my other bishop get to a good square, and well, probably e5 is the right move. Maybe I would even preface bishop f5 with a5, because you just have all these pawns that eventually I might capture. I'm not really worried about losing this pawn just because I have the 2 bishops in the dark squares, and you have so many weak pawns I can attack. In fact, after a5, I'm not sure what white does. Cries. Well, as you can see in the game, a5 really put a hurt on him later.
Well, I guess you would have to play like d5. I'm still trying to...
Man, the truth hurts. The truth, yeah, you don't want to lose everything. Not against me. Against, let's see, oh, Mario left. Against Mario. He left. If he was here, I would never say that. Never. Right, Richard?
Never.
See? But defending everything. Yeah. I'd probably play f3 just to break my own rule. Ever play f3? Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I'll take. I'm sure the computer says that he's okay. You can't play knight e4 because your e5 pawn's hanging, but maybe you can later. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If you could move again. So yeah, this is a way of playing, but I think it's good for black. Okay. My computer also agreed, luckily, with me that knight f4 was the best move. I would guess your way of playing is far superior to my opponent's. So don't play me because you might win. Okay, my opponent attacked my queen and I moved it back to c7. And he played queen f3. Now, a lot of players, especially lower rated ones, like to move their queen out. As a higher rated player, I like to capture your queen when you do that. So keep moving your queen far out so I can take it. And I mean, the queen is going to have to leave d1 eventually because I'm going to play rook d8, and I don't really see a good square. f3 is probably as good as any, but I'm going to harass your queen later, and your pieces are going to get all bottled up. I played a5, as I said I would, and b5 looks like it loses material since all the pieces on the c file are hanging. You can't only let me take a pawn for free. So he played rook b1. After the game, he thought maybe he should play the other rook to b1, but then this rook is overworked, okay? Or as Richard would say, overloaded. I would trade on b4, trade on a1, and then there's a free pawn. So actually, if he wants to defend his pawn, I think rook b1 is the way to do it. And I trade pawns. And this actually reminded me of how chess has evolved, over the last 150 years. it used to be you sack everything and play for mate. Right, Danny? Okay. And then people got a little more sophisticated and they started to get little advantages, Steinitz style. Although Steinitz, before he got his little advantages, would sack all his pieces for mate. Okay. Then players like Capablanca, Petrosian, Smyslov, and Karpov, to name a few, were very good at gaining small advantages, and they would add up to a winning position. I was actually thinking that in this position, okay? And I think my opponent was thinking Arby's, but I was thinking about advantages. Okay, I'll have to ask him if that's what he was thinking. One of my advantages is this pawn is weak and it's under attack. I don't really have any weak pawns that can be attacked. My second advantage is my rook's on this nice open line and his rook is defending a weak pawn. And my third advantage is my knight's really strong in his position and his knight can retreat, and it does retreat. So black has a lot of little advantages that add to a good position. Okay, now I did something called fixing a pawn. Okay, it's not the Beatles song Fixing a Hole, so don't sue me. Okay, well, you could sue me. Okay, good luck collecting. And I played the move b5. Now it's difficult for white to move his b pawn. Again, unless you're in my kids' class, then they would probably go here. Okay, then my move would not work. Okay, maybe the kid should learn how to play. All right, and my opponent has to retreat his bishop. Well, if he retreats to b3, then the b4 pawn is weak. And just to show you what I was thinking during the game, if white plays for tactics, for example, bishop takes b4, bishop takes f7 check, now Danny's happy because there's tactics. And the idea is the rook is going to take the bishop. I was planning on actually playing the move king h8. I don't like my king on the same diagonal as a bishop. Now I can play f5 later, and I'm threatening to take this pawn. So my opponent played bishop to e2, although his pieces are sort of jammed up here. They're sort of tripping over each other. Okay, now this is a very tricky move because if I play the obvious move, rook to a3, now white plays all kinds of tactics. He defends his knight by playing Danny's move, bishop takes f4. The queen defends the knight. And now he can play something like knight takes b5. And I'm about 30 years too old to analyze this position. So if I go back in a time machine 30 years, then I could analyze it. Or if I turn my engine on. Okay? And during the game, I was thinking, well, if I take, he takes this, or he plays queen b3. Takes this, which is not good for black. And if I take his queen, he takes my queen. And I was thinking, well, what if I move my rook and I try to trap this knight? Well, I can't really trap it because it has a square to get out, and it also has a8. So I was like, I don't think I can trap his knight. And I am down a pawn. So I didn't want to analyze crazy stuff like that when I already had an advantage. So instead of playing rook a3, I developed my last piece, bishop to e6. And if you look at the e-file, you'll notice it's symmetrical. Everything's the same. The problem is my knight's better than his, my rook's better than his, and my b pawn is protected and his isn't by a pawn. So black has these little advantages that add up to a big advantage. Okay, he played rook to e1. I think he wanted to play bishop f1 and give his queen some space. And it was funny, after the game ended, this is the second time in the game, my opponent made a move for a very good reason, but he didn't know what the reason was. So he's going to be a grandmaster someday, because he doesn't know why he's playing these great moves, but he still does it. I played the move bishop to d6. And I have a threat, which my opponent didn't see, but he prevents it anyway. Pretty good, pretty talented. Okay, so after the game, he said, why did you play bishop to d6? And I said, well, you prevented my threat. You must have seen. He's like, no. So if black could move again, what would black do? Why did I play bishop to d6? Okay, I'm not going to bet on the 2-beer guy. That's not good. Anybody have 3 beers? No? You at home? Oh, they're drinking whiskey at home? All right. Anyone? Bueller? Okay, remember, white has a weak b pawn, which I would like to capture. So bishop d6 means I can attack that pawn again with What's that? Queen e7, and my queen and bishop form a battery on the b pawn, and I don't see how he defends it. And if I take that b pawn, you're going to wish you didn't play rook e1. So, you know, in this position, I was like, how can I take everything? And I was like, well, I'm already attacking this. How can I attack it again? And I found bishop d6, queen e7. Now here, my opponent defended his b pawn, but at what cost? As Ben Simon would like to say, often says, it's a Pyrrhic victory for white. Because Pyrrhus is your favorite, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's the St. Louis school system for you. Okay, and he played the move knight to d1. Okay, and I assumed the reason he played knight to d1 was so that when I attack his pawn, he could play pawn to c3. But it was happenstance. Man, saying the word happenstance is very funny, but only 2 people in the world know why. And I'm one of them. So, okay. I wrote an article today for the newsletter and used the word happenstance, and it was edited out and put with a word that means something else. So, yeah, that's the fox guarding the hen house here. All right, so I played rook a2 because when the knight was on c3, I couldn't play rook a2, but now I can. Okay, and my opponent didn't want me to take and played the move c3. Okay, so white defended everything, but the knight is on d1. And I learned something a long time ago. When you have pieces on d1 that aren't rooks and queens, that's not good. I had a bishop on d1, and that wasn't good, and I lost. And now my opponent has a knight on d1, and that's not good. That's not the most active square. And even though the pawn structure is totally symmetrical, white is actually losing. And white's losing because almost all of his pieces can't move. His knight on d1 is almost trapped. His rook on e1 is almost trapped. His queen on f3 is almost trapped. And I'm dominating the only open file that's of use, the A file. If I wanted the D file, I'd get that too, because his knight's on d1. And here, I can take advantage of the badly placed white queen by possibly attacking it. Okay, but I need to make a preparatory move. I have to prepare to attack it. Now the whole game, when my king was on e8, I was worried that white will play f4, which seems a bit silly now. I don't think white will play f4. That would be incredibly illegal, even for the kids class. Even in the kids class, they wouldn't suggest well, some might. But I've really stopped him from playing f4. Conversely, I can play the same move with black with decisive effect. And that move is louder?
F5.
F5, yeah. And actually after F5, it's all over. Now the computer gives me this monster evaluation, even though material is equal. And the reason is I have actual threats. Okay, now when Yasser Serouan lectures or does live game analysis, he's not really into actual threats, because that's not fair. Actual threats is cheating. That's more of an Alejandro thing. Okay, that's more of a Maurice thing. Yasser likes to say, my bishop's better than yours, my rook's better than yours, my suit's better than yours. Okay, he's not into like, I'm threatening your queen. He doesn't do any of that. Okay, computers on the other hand like to take all of your pieces. And when Yasser was playing chess at his peak in the 80s and early 90s, grandmasters weren't giving all their pieces away. Okay, unlike certain people in this room. When I say certain people, I mean all of you. So when you give all your pieces away, we take them. When you don't give all your pieces away, now we have to outplay you somehow. That's what Yasser likes to do. Okay, because Yasser is used to playing other grandmasters, and at the chess club I'm used to playing you. So I get to take a lot of pieces. Okay? Now, in this position, I'm basically threatening to take your pawn. And if you take with a queen, I have 2 winning skewers. So let's play a random move. That's pretty random. I can skewer your queen and rook, or I can skewer your queen and your g-pawn. And by the way, the white queen doesn't have a lot of squares to go to. Also, it has none. So f takes e4 is a serious threat. And if you take on f5, for example, I could play bishop to d5 with this kind of skewer, or I could just take back on f5 with anything, the bishop or the rook. And here I'm threatening your rook, and I'm threatening to play e4, which basically traps your queen. Okay, and it's a disaster. Okay, now here he tried to extricate himself from these difficulties, but was not successful. Played the move rook to b2. And the idea is, I no longer have any skewers on this diagonal, and he's kicking out my rook on a2. He's like, get out of there. Okay, and if we trade rooks, and his knight goes to b2 to recapture, maybe he can play knight d3 and get rid of my knight, because the knight on d1 is not very good. Okay, so I took on e4, and I thought the best move was to play queen g3, although, well, I think it is the best move. But okay, black is still winning, black's up material, and white's position is awful, his knight on d1. But usually when somebody takes a pawn, you want to take back. And I think when you're playing the world's best players, something Ben Simon often does, yeah, all the time, you get hit back with a lot of great defense, and your opponent makes it difficult for you to win. When you're playing lower rated players and you're winning, sometimes they just fall apart. It happens. And here, after f takes e4, he really fell apart. He knew he was losing, so he sort of expedited the process. Okay? So he played queen takes e4, and well, I didn't want to lose my rook, so I figured I'll trade rooks first. This is actually quite funny. My opponent didn't take the rook back, which is what I would do. Okay? And after knight takes e4, or b2, the engine wants me to play bishop to d5 and capture this pawn, and it says something like +4, because white's getting checkmated and getting crushed, and the knight is on b2. But my plan was to play bishop f5. I only see one square for the queen. And then e4. Again, I only see one square for the queen. And then knight takes check, wins his queen. That seemed good. So that was my plan. And my plan did not happen because my opponent didn't play knight takes rook. He took the knight on f4, causing total confusion. I'm up so much material now, I was confused. Okay, again, this actually happens to me often at the chess club. I'm one of the few grandmasters who's played the best and the worst. Okay, most grandmasters choose to play the best, and if you take someone like, okay, Vishy Anand, he's pretty good, been a world champion for many years. All of his opponents are quite good. So Anand wins about 2 games a year. Okay, I win 2 games a day because my opponents aren't as good. And Anand isn't used to being up 6, 7, 8 pieces, but I am, because I play a lot of blitz chess at the chess club. In fact, I played several games at the chess club today with no clock against one of the chess club members, and in one game I was up about 3 pieces and nothing was happening, and eventually he was like, yeah, I think I'm lost now, when he had been lost since move 7. But he realized down 3 pieces and unavoidable mate in 1, now maybe he's lost. So at the chess club, I'm used to being up tons and tons of pieces and my opponent's being oblivious. Probably if Anand was playing, he would be like, why is my opponent down a rook and a piece and thinking everything's okay? Okay, but I have more experience than he does at these things. All right, so I play rook takes bishop. I'm not surprised that I'm up a rook and my opponent just makes moves and doesn't care. Doesn't surprise me at all. Okay, and if my opponent moves his queen away, you will notice I'm up a rook. So, yeah. Now, in my life, at certain chess tournaments, occasionally we get a reporter who is not a chess reporter and asks chess questions, and they seem a bit confused. My 2 favorites are, somebody asked Stuart Rachel, my good friend, how good he was at chess, and he said, I'm the best player in Alabama. And she was like, wow, you're the best player in Alabama? Because he was like 13. And she was shocked. And he says, well, wait a minute. Being the best chess player in Alabama is like being the best hockey player in Idaho. Okay, he was trying to minimize. And my favorite chess question was, if you were up 5 pieces against the world champion, how would you do? And the person being interviewed said, I'd win. And they said, no, you wouldn't. You don't realize how strong the world champion is. Okay, so yeah, I guess my opponent didn't realize extra rook was pretty good. Okay, now to cause more confusion, my opponent gave his queen away. Okay, but I've played a lot of you in this room, so I'm used to that. You guys give your queen away, I take it. Now here, I thought better of it. If I take the queen, which is a fine move, nothing wrong with that, and you take my rook, I have a queen for a rook. Sounds good, okay? But I analyzed another variation that wasn't taking his queen, and I ended up playing it. Because somebody said, possibly Lasker, which Lasker I don't know, I guess I'll ask her. If you see a good move, find a better one. Find a better one. Was it Lasker? It was somebody, yeah. So I found a move that wasn't pawn takes queen. I played rook takes e2. I guess it was a better move because my opponent resigned. Okay, well, obviously I'm threatening the queen still, and I'm threatening rook takes rook mate. So probably he should play rook takes rook. And then I take the queen, and he takes the bishop. Here, I also have a queen for a rook, but this seemed a lot easier. And it turns out it is a lot easier. The engine says bishop e5. Now, this is trapped. Queen d7 is sort of annoying. And I don't know what he does now. Okay. So actually, this was a better version. So like if you thought I was cheating, which is a good way to think, then you'd be right. Because if somebody was cheating, they would play rook takes e2, because that's a better move than pawn takes queen. Okay? So if I was using a computer every move, then I would play rook takes e2. Although the computer really disliked a lot of my other moves. So I guess I wasn't cheating. Now if we can go back, I want to show you a tactical move the computer suggested, which I saw, and the computer said that I'm totally crazy. It didn't actually say my moves were, it said you, Ben Finegold, are totally crazy. Actually, my name. At bishop d6, which I thought was a great move, and forced my opponent to play knight d1 to defend his b pawn, the computer said is a terrible move. Why would I play a terrible move? It proves I'm not using a computer. I fooled you all. Okay? Because a computer would never play bishop d6 because of the move bishop takes b5. I saw bishop takes b5, and I'm like, well, that's stupid. And the computer's like, that's great. So I would take, takes. Finally, Danny Machuca takes notice. Bishop takes b5. Now he's happy. And after all of these captures, it says black has the minimalist of advantages. And I was like, I'm up a bishop. So, okay. But the computer likes all of white's pawns, and it likes the fact that white's not getting crushed anymore. Basically, I have a bishop. I have to win in 1,000 moves. Computer says that black has a small advantage here, like 0.2, 0.3. Whereas if I don't play bishop to d6, it says I have a large advantage. Now, this is why Karpov is good, and you guys are sitting in a dimly lit room looking at chess. Okay? When Karpov would slowly build his advantages and eventually win, which I've shown in previous lectures, he didn't make tactical errors throwing it all away. If you watch football, and I'm sure you do, you'll notice some teams, they're gaining 5, 6, 7 yards of play, and after 15 plays, they get a touchdown. Well, if you keep doing that, it's possible after 9 great plays or 10 great plays and you've gained 70 yards that you fumble or you interception. And it's all for naught. This happens in chess. You build your advantage slowly. The computer says you're up 0.1, then 0.2, then 0.3, then 0.4. Your opponent doesn't know what's going wrong, and then you hang your rook, and then you're losing. So when you slowly build your advantage and you make a tactical mistake, it all goes away. The computer said that's what I did. It said black has a great game. Yay, you play great. Bishop d6, you're terrible. Bishop takes b5, and white should draw. Okay? My opponent didn't play bishop takes b5, so I look good. But if I was playing a super grandmaster who for some reason was playing really badly with white, so it's, I don't know, too much to drink, then they would have played bishop b5 here, and it would have been very difficult to win. They wouldn't have played knight to d1, making their pieces even worse. They would have taken their last chance. That's why the super grandmasters are good when they're having a bad day and things aren't going well. If somebody lets them get a little trick in, because it's hard to see all the tactics, then they can play that trick and they can get outplayed most of the game but still draw or win. And in fact, the great poker player Chip Reese, who I'm sure you all are familiar with, when he was alive, because after he died, he didn't say very much. But when he was alive, he said, the reason I'm a great poker player isn't because of my A game. Everybody's A game is good. My B game is pretty good. When I play badly, I still play pretty well. And when other people play badly, man, and Danny knows what I'm talking about. Okay, I saw Danny play his A game in round 2, and then I saw his B game in round 3. Okay, in his A game, he beat a much higher rated player. In his B game, he gave all his pieces away, and then said, darn, I didn't win. Okay, now of course, maybe his A game wasn't enough for that guy either. We don't know that. Okay, so bishop d6, the computer doesn't like, and I saw them move bishop b5, but I was like, he won't do that, that's terrible. But it wasn't as terrible as I thought. So a little hiccup in the game, giving white a chance, but that's what I'm here for. I give you local St. Louis players a chance, then if you don't take it, then nobody knows. Okay, well, thanks for coming to Mastering the Middle Game. That's why I let him take on b5. If I didn't, it would be Grandmastering the Middle Game. But I made a little error. And I'll see all you guys next week.